Yeah, that's that. This is Sulak, and I had a few of them. This little icy planet is Andoria. I've not been here before. What's this guy say? Hello, I'm the park ranger. Build a snowman. Huh? Okay. So, what do we have today? I kind of have a backlog of things. There's one thing I want to talk about, and one thing that I've been putting on the show. But I have a couple of obituaries that I wanted to make mention of, and then because Monday is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I will talk about an article relating to that. But we will begin with this from notable and quotable. So, Gertrude Himmelfarb passed away at the end of last year, back in December. And this is a little sample of her writing. She was a scholar, died at the age of 97. And this is a little excerpt from Beyond Social Policy, Remoralizing America, something she published back in 1995. In 19th century Britain, Victorians spoke the language of morality because they believed in the reality of virtues as the guiding principles of public as well as private affairs. In this sense, there was a basic consensus on social affairs. Liberals and conservatives, radicals and socialists disagreed about specific policies, but they were agreed on the principle that any measure of relief, for example, or charity for that matter, had to justify itself by showing that it would promote the moral as well as material well-being of its recipients, their, quote, character, as the Victorians said, and the character not only of those receiving relief, but also of those not receiving relief, the independent laboring poor as well. This was the rationale behind the principle of less eligibility, which was the basis of the Poor Law Reform of 1834. This principle stipulated that the condition of the able-bodied pauper, it did not apply to the sick, aged, or children, be less eligible, that is, less desirable than, less favorable than the condition of the independent laborer, and less eligibility meant not only that the pauper received less by way of relief than the laborer did from his wages, but also that he receive it in such a way as to make pauperism less respectable than work, to, quote, stigmatize it, as we now say disapprovingly. What is this guy saying? Okay, well that's fine. In the past few decades, we have deliberately divorced poor relief from moral principles, sanctions, or incentives. This reflects in part the theory that society is responsible for all social problems and should therefore assume the task of solving them. If the recipient of welfare is not responsible for his situation, why should he be put in a condition of less eligibility? Yes, yeah. I think it's important that there is I'll do my commentary at the end. I'll keep going. The divorce of social policy from moral principle, the demoralization of social policy, also reflects a spirit of relativism that is so pervasive in our time. It is this that makes it difficult to pass any moral judgments or impose any moral conditions on the recipients of relief. Yeah, and it also makes it harder for them to get better and to do better, because we can't tell them that anything that they're doing is wrong. That's why I think it's important that philanthropy is done by citizens, private individuals, so that they can reinforce those values in people. And you can either accept their help or not. But I think if the state just doles out resources to people unconditionally, then you're not going to create an environment where circumstances have to change. People just become accustomed to that as an entitlement. It's just not good for anybody. So I thought that was an interesting piece from her. Rest in peace. And here's another one that happened recently, and I was sad when I heard about this. I'm looking for the, I thought I had an article in here. Here it is. Roger Scruton, a conservative from modern times. The Academy rejected him in the 1980s. Decades later, he told me he'd been one of the first to be, quote, canceled by Dominic Green. They say you should never meet your heroes because they always disappoint you, but Roger Scruton, who died Sunday at 75, was gracious, intelligent, and generous in life as he was on the page. His humanity and principled candor made him the most influential conservative thinker since Edmund Burke, and one of the most unfairly slandered writers in modern times. Conservatism has always been as much a temperament as a philosophy, not an ideology, but an antidote to it. Three thinkers defined conservatism in the 20th century: Russell Kirk, Michael Oakeshott, and Scruton. Kirk laid the intellectual foundations of modern conservatism, but is little known outside of the U.S. Oakeshott was an academic philosopher, so he remained obscure even in his native Britain. Scruton was both academic and thinker, a rare combination these days, and was read across the English-speaking world and beyond. Only William F. Buckley, Jr. commanded so wide an audience, but none of these men had both Scruton's intellectual range and literary style. Roger Vernon Scruton was the son of a working-class teacher of radical opinions and a mother of genteel aspirations. He was raised west of London at High Wycombe, a few miles from Burke's home at Beaconsfield. He won a competitive place to a grammar school and then a place to study natural sciences at Cambridge. His father considered that a step too far and stopped speaking to him. Upon arrival at Cambridge, he switched to philosophy. Aesthetics, not politics, were always Scruton's passion. Thus far, a mostly typical post-war biography of upward mobility. But in May 1968, studying for his doctorate and dating a French student, Danielle Lafitte, Scruton witnessed the student riots in Paris, the spectacle of middle-class children tearing up cobblestones in working-class neighborhoods and justifying their violence with ludicrous Marxist gobbledygook, in his words, caused Scruton to realize that he wanted to conserve things rather than pull them down. Yeah, if you are beholden to this postmodern anti-philosophy, all you can do is destroy things. You can't really affirm anything. But I've made that point previously. Anyways, to continue, in 1974, Scruton was one of the founders of the conservative philosophy group, whose meetings were addressed by Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, and attended by Margaret Thatcher. Name dropping. Woo! By the end of the decade, Scruton had married and divorced Miss Lafitte, and his academic career was on a similar path, first a lecturer and later professor of aesthetics at the University of London's Birkbeck College. He was the school's only conservative apart from the woman who served the professor's dinner. He published a book, quote, The Meaning of Conservatism, in 1980 and founded the Salisbury Review, a conservative intellectual journal, in 1982. His career in the academy ended. Decades later, he told me with wry amusement that he'd been one of the first people to be canceled. Scruton would be publicly denounced as racist and physically threatened when he ventured to speak on campus. He was entirely undeterred, usually right and consistently ahead of his time. Scruton rejected multiculturalism and defended the rooted realities of family and faith, nation and tradition. He denounced architectural brutalism and metropolitan elitism as assaults on taste and democracy. He saw through the oikophobes who love every people and country except their own, and advocated for what we now call Brexit. In Green Philosophy 2011, he defined a non-utopian and conservative environmentalism. Oikophobes. Greek something. I haven't heard that one before, but I like it. The Academy's loss was the world's gain. Lured by the hunting, Scruton settled in the English village of Brinkworth, Wiltshire, the first philosopher to live there since Thomas Hobbes. There he and his wife, Sophie Jeffreys, an architectural historian, created the Scrutopia Summer School. Must have been named after him. He wrote more than 50 books and a tide of articles and topics as varied as wine and Wagner, fox hunting, and free trade. His reach, like his taste in architecture, was liberal in the original sense of humane interest. He even looked for the good in Jean-Paul Sartre. The real reason people are conservatives is that they are attached to the things that they love and want to preserve them from abuse and decay, Scruton wrote in 2015. They are attached to their family, their friends, their religion, and their immediate environment. But there was nothing provincial about Scruton. He enlivened English empiricism with the grandeur of German idealism and linguistic intricacies of Wittgenstein. He lived his beliefs, whether working for the anti-communist underground university behind the Iron Curtain, playing the organ in his local church, flying back to England on weekends while teaching at Boston University to ride in the local hunt, or recording his impressions in the seconds between falling off his horse and hitting the ground. I was talking to somebody, this is just a useless aside, but I was talking to somebody recently about those old fox hunts. They'd put on these goofy riding outfits, and they'd get on their horses, and they'd go out with their dogs, and they'd go try to, hunt these foxes. And there was some fancy schmancy place I was staying a couple months ago, and they had a series of these paintings, large paintings depicting this fox hunt. I guess it's a very English thing. Anyways, to continue, when I visited his farm in 2017 for the annual Apple Day, a village get-together with philosophical lecture and locavore lamb chops, the attendees included a Syrian refugee, a Czech philosophy students, and a phalanx of local jam makers. Scruton shambled about in his old tweeds, observer and participant. Having fun, he asked. He educated us all and fought for truth without forfeiting humor. He leaves a generous and lasting bounty of honest words and brave deeds. Yes, and I appreciated the words and thoughts of Roger Scruton, and he will be missed. Rest in peace. He did one little piece on YouTube. You can watch it. It's referred to as the tyranny of pop music, and the whole idea is that we take for normal the kind of blaring of music 24/7 at a lot of public places, and he said this diminishes music, this diminishes our appreciation of it, it's intrusive, and I've worked a lot of jobs where there's just always the music blaring, and I tend to agree, although the article was a little crotchety and overstated. But I don't know, sometimes he was that way. So now we're gonna get to the next section. Do I need an intermission? Nah, I think I can keep rolling. Nah, maybe I'll give myself a little intermission. Let's see, what are we gonna play here? Oh, yes, this is perfect. Okay. So we're going to read another article about Martin Luther King Jr. And maybe I'll play this song. Yeah, this is just a song. And I'm going to have a beverage for a second. I will be back in like 30 seconds. Yeah, but play them bassy notes. Play them bassy notes, though. Hold on. Yeah. Bassy notes. Reading articles from the papers. Okay. Here we are. It is entitled, "The Left Forgets What Martin Luther King Stood For." I'm going to take my captain's chair here. And this article is by Robert L. Woodson. As the nation celebrates the birth of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., the progressive left will again seize the moment to twist the story of Black American struggle to the detriment of those who suffered most in that struggle. They'll put all the attention on the oppressive conditions faced by Black freedom fighters, what white racists did to them, rather than on their own spirit in fighting to gain equal rights under the law. Instead of celebrating Blacks' achievements and the progress made towards delivering on America's promissory note, the left will transport yesterday's real injustice into today's false social justice narrative, ignoring the principles that were so crucial to Dr. King. I feel like the progressive mentality today finds those ideas from Martin Luther King Jr. to be problematic. For one, his Christian ethics. Because Christian ethics is patriarchy, it's white supremacy, it's the oppressive norm. We have to get rid of it. I don't know if a lot of progressives would say that as starkly as I did, but it's in the language surrounding a lot of their objections to the normative culture. They do not like Christianity. And Martin Luther King Jr., I was watching... John McWhorter was on Coleman Hughes' podcast. Coleman Hughes just started a podcast fairly recently, and they were talking about how, in their words, Martin Luther King Jr. was able to use a Christian meta-narrative, the Christian ethic, to transcend a lot of the division in society. And he did so successfully, and it was very powerful. But they both being, in 20, I think they did that interview in like 2019. So being in the year 2020 and both of them being atheists, they have their feelings about sort of the progressive view of what it means to be Black and their disagreements with it, and just trying to find something as powerful as that ethic now when, a lot of people, academics are atheists. And so, I don't know, just trying to find things that are convincing and effective. Anyway, to continue, history is full of inspiring examples of Black people succeeding against the odds, including building their own schools, like Tuskegee. That's one example I can think of. Hotels, railroads, and banking systems, when doors were closed to them. According to the economist Thomas Sowell, the poverty rate among Blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. These accomplishments were made possible by a set of values cherished among Blacks at the time: self-determination, resiliency, personal virtue, honesty, honor, and accountability. Dr. King understood that these values would be the the bedrock for Black success once true equality was won. As early as 1953, he warned that one of the most common tendencies of human nature is that of placing responsibility on some external agency for sins we have committed or mistakes we have made. Today, the progressive left wants to ignore the achievements and pretend that Blacks are perpetual victims of white racism. The New York Times' 1619 Project essay series is the latest salvo in this attack on America's history and founding, claiming anti-Black racism runs in the very DNA of this country. This statement is an abomination to everything Dr. King stood for. Further, the left's disinterest in historical accuracy, as evinced in the Times' dismissal of corrections sought by prominent historians, and its frequent perversion of it says Black's story, maybe even black history, will have grave consequences not only for blacks but the nation as a whole. In sharp contrast to the claims of the 1619 Project, which disparages the American Revolution and Declaration of Independence and insists America is hopelessly racist, Dr. King deeply believed in the need to remain true to the founder's vision, the patriot dream that sees beyond the years. To him, that was the only avenue toward fulfilling America's promise, as he wrote in 1963, the letter from Birmingham jail. Quote, "One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation," he wrote, "because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with America's destiny." Dr. King, who sought full participation in America, would never have indulged today's grievance-based identity politics, where social justice warriors use race as a battering ram against the country. In fact, in letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. King explicitly warned against the type of groupthink that characterizes identity politics. Quote, "Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but as Reinhold Niebuhr has told us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals." End quote. Groups tend to be more immoral than individuals, and the whole political philosophy here is to get all the benefits of organizing as a group, but having none of the collective responsibility. Because when you have group responsibility for things, and you're saying white people are responsible for this and this and this and this, that starts blowing back at you. That creates a terrible precedent. So in the long run, if that's how you're doing things, it's not good. In the short run, it might benefit you if you can persuade people, but in the long run, it is very unhealthy to organize in such a fashion. So, I don't know. This seems to have some parallels also with talking about the specific values that used to be part of, like, well, we have these traditions and we have these values, and this is what makes us succeed, not external conditions. It's like, well, I may as well not try because I'm disenfranchised. That seems to be more of the common trope today. Anyway, to continue. Yesterday's values prepared blacks to walk through the doors of opportunity opened to them through civil rights. Family, faith, character, and moral behavior were all crucial to their victories. Today's social justice warriors trade on the currency of oppression, deriding the concept of personal responsibility and always blaming external forces. I can think of no better way to instill hopelessness and fear in a young person than to tell them that he is a victim, powerless to change his circumstance. Yeah, and today's progressives also do that with women and any identity group and any person who is disgruntled and has enough existential angst to listen to their hateful, shallow malarkey. To continue, during the civil rights movement, blacks never permitted oppression to define who we were. Instead, we cultivated moral competence, enterprise, and thrift, and viewed oppression as a stumbling block, not an excuse. Dr. King would have refused to participate in today's identity politics gamemanship because it frames its grievances in opposition to the American principles of freedom and equality that he sought to redeem. Well, who needs equality? We have equity now, whatever that means. It's better. It's socially just. It's economically just. He held the country's founding principles and sought to destroy only what got in the way of delivering the promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as well as the recognition that all men are created equal. And also his use of civil disobedience, where he said, I value the rule of law, and I value this country, but I think that this is unjust, so I will protest and accept the penalty. And if you will accept the shame of punishing me for what I am demonstrating to be a hypocrisy. That's a powerful moral statement. Um, yep. To continue. Last month, the school board of Westfield, New Jersey, approved a history course in critical race theory, which is the embodiment of the oppressor narrative embraced by the left. Yeah, and also when it comes to critical, I have probably made this point before, but I'm going to make it again. There is this confusion of language, which I think is deliberate. When I am talking about critical, usually I'm thinking critical thinking. So critical thinking is like, what are my biases? How could I be wrong? What is my what's the word for it? Epistemology. What is how do I know what I know, and how can I make sure that my conclusions are reliable? That's critical thinking versus critical theory, which is entirely inductive reasoning about power structures and who and what is oppressive. And we have a structure and a hierarchy for these things based on power and resentment, and we're just going to make inductive statements about what we see in the world, and we're going to call that scholarship. And call it critical so it has the semblance of authenticity, which it is not. Anyway, at the board meeting, a young woman spoke passionately in favor of the course, ending her comments by blaming slavery for the absence of black fathers in the home. This is how successful the left, with its lethal message of despair and distortion of history, has been undermining agency within the black community. To honor the legacy of Dr. King, we must not only acknowledge the evil he confronted, but also focus on his example of overcoming it. He persevered and triumphed in the face of evil because he was beholden to truth, honor, and love for all mankind, driven as he was to see blacks share fully in the American dream. We must not let the purveyors of identity politics fudge the record. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in the promise of America. In fact, he helped to fulfill it. Mr. Woodson is president and founder of the Woodson Center. So yeah, that's that for today. But yeah, I was going to do a little rant to cap off everything, but I think that's just all I wanted to talk about. So two obituaries and a little piece from Martin Luther King Jr., which I have many thoughts on, but nothing organized to give any statements today. No comment. So I'll think on it some more, and we'll continue the discussion later. Thanks for listening to Governor Sulak. Catch you next time.